On the evening of October 11th, 1973, 42-year-old Charles Hickson and 19-year-old Calvin Parker were fishing off a pier on the west bank of the Pascagoula River in Jackson County, Mississippi, when they saw two flashing blue lights and an oval-shaped object 30 feet across and 8 to 10 feet high. Parker and Hixson claim that they were conscious yet paralyzed, while three creatures took them aboard the object and subjected them to an examination before releasing them. Today we discuss the Pascagoula Alien Abduction Case, a well-documented but highly scrutinized UFO investigation. Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson preferred to go fishing at night, as the catfish are said to be easier to catch. But while out along the moonlit banks of the Pascagoula River at the former Shaw Peters shipyard in the fall of 1973, they encountered something uniquely strange and forever life-changing. The men heard a whirring sound. They turned around to see a strange egg-shaped object floating a few feet above the water. They reported that the object had a bluish lighting, and despite being out on their own with no one else around, the object managed to get within 10 feet of them without them being aware of it. As they froze to the spot in disbelief and gazed at the UFO, they reported that a frontal door opened, and they watched as three beings exited the craft. In the sheriff's report, the men state that the beings were of unknown origin and coming straight at them. They described them as being 5 foot tall, with bullet-shaped heads, no necks, no discernible eyes, small slits for mouths, and their noses and ears were thin, cone-like objects protruding out, described like the carrots you would put on a snowman. Their skin was said to be pale and wrinkled. The beings had lobster-like claws at the ends of their arms, and elephant-like feet attached to fused legs. While approaching the two men from the UFO, they hovered or floated forward over the water and seemed to move in a jerking, robot-like fashion. When the beings approached and touched them, Hixson, still frozen in fear, said he felt a numbness come over his entire body, ultimately leading to what he believed to be temporary paralysis. At this point in their recollection, the two men were separated. Parker was said to have passed out while Hixson was brought aboard the craft. He recalls being led to a bright lit room, and still floating, he was never put on the ground during his time in the UFO. He was levitating while what he describes as a red eye-like object hovered over his body, thought to be conducting a test, in his words, scanning him. He said the scan lasted 20 minutes, after which time the beings led him out of the room, and he, still under the guidance of the beings, floated back to the riverbanks, where he was reunited with Parker. Parker was now conscious and was crying and praying, clearly aware of what was happening. The beings then put Hixson on the ground, returned to the egg-shaped object, and the doors closed. The object took off and was never seen again by the two men. Immediately after the event, the two men contacted their local Air Force base. The Air Force told them they needed to report it to the local sheriff's office. Right away, the officers thought it was a hoax. They put the men in an interview room, and unknowingly to the two abductees, the room was wired, and the sheriff secretly recorded their entire conversation. Expecting to hear them plotting what to say, maybe laughing about fooling everyone with their story, the sheriffs actually heard something far different. The two men were talking about the events from the evening, and were both still in complete shock. Their story never wavered. The two men had clearly been through a traumatic ordeal. Deciding they may be telling the truth, the sheriffs ultimately heard them out, and the case was well documented. However, the story got out to the press and spread like wildfire. getting the attention of many researchers. It is said that someone tried to hypnotize Hixson, but going back to such a fright and state that the hypnosis was ultimately stopped. Hixson also took it upon himself to undergo a polygraph test. There is much skepticism surrounding the element of the story here, however. Hixson apparently used a very inexperienced tester to conduct the polygraph, and when requested to do another polygraph with a professional police tester, Hixson refused. However, he did pass the original polygraph test, but there is not a clear reason why he refused the police test, which has led many to believe it was a hoax. The 1973 Pascagoula Alien Abduction Case had a lot of time and research dedicated to it, but with no physical evidence of the events, and Hixson and Parker being the only two witnesses, it's not considered very credible for researchers, as say the Rendlesham Forest incident, for example. Furthermore, Parker was said to have elaborated on the events later and claim that he was also led into the craft. He later claimed he was laid down on a sloped table and examined by a petite, evidently female being. He says he was paralyzed and was able to observe the being inject a needle into the base of the underside of his penis. The being later communicated with him telepathically, suggesting that he had been taken for a reason. While he was not able to define it, Parker felt a sense of imminent harm. Nevertheless, he was led back outside the craft and deposited into his original position unharmed, despite previously saying he was unconscious throughout the ordeal. He later claimed that 19 years later, he came into contact with the same craft again. This time, he voluntarily walked aboard the craft and met with the same female being that had examined his body in 1973. He claimed he had a conversation with the being in English. She informed him that they shared the same God, that the Bible was an authentic text, and that her species wanted to live on Earth, but could not due to humanity's tendency towards war and destruction. Charles Hickson sadly passed away in 2011 from natural causes. However, Calvin Parker wrote 2 books about the subject and has found national fame as a result. The Pascagoula Alien Abduction Case is very interesting and unique in its details. The descriptions of the beings, the way they moved and communicated with the 2 men, has garnered a lot of attention, as well as skepticism about its truth. Whether you believe the 2 men are telling the truth, the fact of the matter is that something strange occurred that evening on the Pascagoula River. And we may never know what that truth is, honestly. The only thing that we can really do is be aware of your surroundings and keep an open mind, because you never know who may come visit you in the dead of night. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. And one last thing. If you want to learn more about this UFO encounter, I left a link in the description for Calvin Parker's book, Pascagoula, The Close Encounter, My Story. It's $26.50 paperback, and it is an affiliate link. I will receive a small commission